Right, I'm gonna hit live.
This is 313.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully, you can hear us and see us. We'll be starting in just a second. Oh, yes, I need to do timestamps.
Yes.
Lots to talk about today. Big week for Microsoft news.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing. It looks like there's still some noise on this line. Oh well. Someday I guarantee you that problem, if you're still hearing a buzz, will just magically fix itself.
Probably when you
Okay.
get a new computer.
Which probably won't happen for a long time.
Testing
Right.
1, 2, 3.
All right. I am
Testing
now
1, 2,
recording.
3. I'm now recording.
3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Windows Central Podcast, episode 313 for May 25th, 2023. Hey everyone, Deanna Rubino here with Zach Bowden for another exciting episode of the Windows Central Podcast special early edition because Zach has to go to the dentist tomorrow. But we do have a lot to cover this week because Microsoft Build has been going on, and turns out usually, this cycle of build used to be awesome and had Windows Phone stuff back in the day, and they gave out laptops to people, and then it became completely developer focused and became less interesting. And it became even so less interesting they stopped inviting press to it. But turns out this year was actually pretty exciting, and part of that's because AI, but turns out there's actually more than AI too. So there was a lot of Windows 11 news. Panos Panay was there. He gave his Panos talk as usual to the crowd. And Moment 3, which we've been talking about for a while, is now live. So we'll go through that. There's a new file explorer coming. More news on widgets, including answering people's prayers about widgets that specifically people don't like. There's news on the Microsoft Store, which also got AI. There's a new UI for Edge. Oh, there's so much going on. It's actually kind of interesting. And I probably won't be talking as much since Zach is the one I paid attention to most of it while I was working on other projects. But Zach, how you doing on this fine Thursday post-build?
I'm very tired. It's been a stressful last few days covering build. We had the stuff under embargo, but it was a messy embargo. Like, this is sort of behind the scenes stuff, but when we got the email with, like, hey, would you like to have the build news under embargo? Originally it was just build news at May 23rd at the hour it came out, and then they were like a few days later, oh, by the way, there's an additional embargo for the next day for Windows news. Would you agree to that? Yes, we would. So originally they were planning to do the Windows stuff the day after and split the embargo for some reason. But then as we were working on it, they were like, actually, change of plans. It's all coming out on day one. So suddenly all that Windows stuff is pushed up a day, and we now have to scramble to cover that as well. We got to it in the end, but the night before build, as I was working on this stuff, my internet went out, so I had to finish it all on 4G. It was a real nightmare.
Geez.
But we finally got there, and then I think we did pretty well. I think our coverage for all the Windows stuff and the Bing stuff was actually pretty good. And yeah, it was fantastic. We will dive in. Did you tune into any of the Bill stuff at all, or did you just read our excellent coverage on WindowsCentral.com?
I just read our excellent coverage. I didn't
Brilliant.
watch a single video because if
That's
I
okay.
can't be there, why bother?
Yeah.
I'll wait for our summary of it. So,
Exactly. Yeah. So I guess in that case, we should just jump straight into the big news. Of course, we kind of teased this a little bit last week on the podcast, but Microsoft is bringing, excuse me, its AI Copilot to Windows. It's going to be a Windows 11 assistant, a feature built into the OS. And this isn't really that surprising. We've seen them bring it to Bing. Excuse me, I've just suddenly needs to cough or something. They brought it to Bing. They're bringing it to Microsoft 365. It's available in Edge. Where else are they going to put it? Of course, they're going to bring it to Windows. And this works exactly how you would expect it to. There's an icon on the taskbar. You click it. A sidebar swings out from the right. You can move the sidebar around. You can dock it as a window or move it to the left. But within that window is a sort of chat interface, just like Bing Chat, where you can type in commands, ask it questions, and it can intelligently respond with context. And you can give it files or PDFs and stuff and ask it to summarize, analyze. And Microsoft says it will also be interoperable in that it can also like open or jump to areas within programs, assuming the developer supports it, I believe. So you can ask it, for example, play me a jazzy album. And it will be like, sure, open Spotify, pull you to a jazzy album and begin playing it. It's everything we ever wanted from Cortana under a different name. And that's pretty cool.
Except for the Cortana bit.
Except for the Cortana part. So yeah, this is a super interesting announcement because...
Do you think they recycled code?
I don't know. Maybe there's maybe it's a hybrid. We won't know till we get our hands on it because it's unfortunately not in preview yet. They've announced it. It's coming in preview next month in Windows Insider builds, which likely means it will roll out as part of the 23H2 release in the fall. But until we can actually get our hands on it, we won't really know how or what it's capable of and how if it's mixing with old Cortana features. But it does work. It's powered by the exact same technology as Bing Chat. So it's using the Chat GPT stuff, the Prometheus stuff, has all of their same sort of AI safeguards and whatnot around insensitive questions and stuff. But the idea is that, it's an assistant that can help you with your PC. You can ask it to enable dark mode, for example, or focus sessions, or you can ask it for help. And how do I enable this setting, or how do I change this toggle? You can ask it to open apps or check Windows Update. It will do those things for you if you ask it. And that, I think, is really cool. And this really is going to be what puts AI at the forefront of people's experiences. Because, so far it's been in Bing and Edge. Bing and Edge, not exactly high usage numbers. Windows, on the other hand, millions of users, right? And it's going to be pinned to the taskbar by default. This is going to be a big deal, I think, for Microsoft. What are your thoughts on this so far, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what we wanted / expected them to do. I'm curious about the voice stuff. We've tried voice things before. Right. There's Alexa for, on PC that's been there for a while. How many of you are using it? I don't know. Cortana had voice stuff for a while too. I know some people use it for like setting reminder and stuff, but like it is kind of interesting to, Windows settings much better these days than it was like years ago. It's much easier to navigate. I think they've done a pretty good job, but on occasion it's still a little tricky to find something. So using voice to be like, hey, just go do this for me, I think is definitely helpful. I'm more interested in the idea of AI preemptively helping you with tasks because it's learned your habits. And like we've already kind of seen that with laptops where they learn your charging habits and usage habits. And you do see it with Windows in terms of like it knows when to like install an update because it knows when you typically work and not to bother you. So there is some of this machine learning stuff going on in the background, but I kind of want to see more of it because I think that'll be a little bit more interesting. It popping up and being able to ask it to do certain tasks, I think it's helpful. It's kind of cool having the chat thing built in. Obviously, I think that's probably a little bit more useful. Though there's little shortcuts you can do. Like if you go to Bing right now and you go to the chat section, you can actually like kind of create a PWA right there, just pin it to your taskbar, and then you just click it open and it'll just be a chat window. So you can kind of do that stuff already, but it's going to be kind of nice to have it. But how many people know about that, right? That's something you have to go and do where this will just be kind of built in. Of course, it'll grow. They'll get more features to it. I wonder if you can tell it to reset itself or reformat your drive.
I highly doubt it. That'd be hilarious. Kill yourself.
Sir, that would end me. Yes, do it. That's my dark mind going places. But yeah, hopefully we'll see this, in the coming months. It sounds like this, what's cool is this isn't like a Windows 12 thing. Right. Although my guess is Windows 12 is being built with even more of this code involved, and it's going to even be more tightly integrated.
A few people were on Twitter like, so was this the stuff you were hinting at for Windows VNext? Is this all the AI stuff they were working on? Absolutely not. This is just one part of a much bigger picture in regards to AI. So far, all we've really seen from Microsoft in regards to AI this year is cloud-powered AI experiences. Everything that was announced at Build, more or less, other than the NPU stuff, is cloud-based, so it doesn't require an NPU to use. So a lot of people are like, will this be an NPU-based feature? No, it's exactly like Bing Chat. It relies on the cloud to process your queries and send you responses that can be used on your computer. So this isn't NPU stuff. Windows 12, the AI stuff Microsoft is working on for Windows 12 will more be reliant on NPU stuff, local processing, and that enables the things that Dan was mentioning, things like context-aware smart features, being able to analyze text and suggest projects to jump in or features or programs to launch based on what the user's currently viewing. That sort of stuff is still to come and is, to my knowledge, being saved for Windows V next. Today, what we're getting on Windows 11 is just more Bing Chat, more or less. It was very interesting to watch them announce Copilot for Windows, because the amount of times they used Bing, the term Bing was very small. I think it was only a couple of times at most. They have really all of a sudden stepped back from the Bing terminology and are now really focusing on Copilot. And that, I think, is a much better name for this thing than Bing Chat. I mean, it is chatting on Bing, but I think the Bing Copilot or the Office Copilot or the Windows Copilot makes more sense, because these all share the same platform. This is the same large language module. They all basically can do the same stuff feature-wise. It's just where you're seeing it. Where in Office, it'll be more capable of doing Office things. In Windows, it'll be more capable of doing Windows things. In Bing, it'll be more capable of doing Bing things, or searching the internet. So that's pretty much everything we know so far about the Windows Copilot. The other thing you mentioned was voice. I don't know if the Windows Copilot actually accepts voice input. At least in the UI they showed off, there was no microphone button. Maybe there will be in the actual working version. I don't know, but it would be weird.
You think that would be?
Yeah, right.
Something.
Yeah, it would be weird, but yeah, I guess we'll have to see regarding that. So yeah, that's the Windows Copilot stuff. I'm very excited for this because this is stuff that hopefully maybe even I'll use. One of the examples they showed was being able to like throw in an audio file into the Windows Copilot sidebar and ask it to transcribe. That's amazing.
Which is something you can do in Word, I think, right now.
You can, yeah. But now,
so they're just taking their
native system function is amazing, because not everybody has Word. It is pre-installed on most PCs, but not everybody has a subscription to Word, so they don't use it. Being able to just quickly throw that into the sidebar is going to be an amazing feature. That's just one example. You can ask it to analyze or summarize all sorts of things, documents, files, you name it. So it's going to be pretty cool. The other question people now have is, and it's been a question since the beginning, but it's becoming more of a question now that Microsoft is rolling this Copilot stuff out to more surfaces. How is Microsoft going to offset the cost of this stuff? Because for those who don't know, running a large language model is not cheap. Microsoft needs to buy lots of GPUs and servers to be able to process all of this data. It's not something that can really be done locally on an Ultrabook, for example, because it's just a lot of data to process. So how is Microsoft going to...
Yeah, right now they're doing, I think, the old Xbox model.
Yeah, me too.
They're eating the cost to get adoption. I would also say probably it's not worth paying for at this time.
I think you're right. I think if it was already behind a paywall, nobody would use it, because nobody's had the chance to take advantage of it and go, oh, actually, I couldn't live without this now. Once they get that, once they hook you, then they're going to be like, oh, it's $5.99 a month.
Yeah, I mean, it'll definitely be tied to Microsoft 365.
I agree, yeah.
And so they might have an AI tier where it's just I don't think it's going to be much more. They don't need to, charge a lot, I don't think, for it. But until there's real value there, they can't charge for it, right? Even Bing Chat. Bing Chat's cool. It's fun to use. It's becoming more and more helpful. But you don't want to charge for it, or at least make that the only option, right? ChatGPT does have a premium version. That's $20 a month. And in fact, Richard Devine did an article talking about how it's not worth it, because you could do all that and more with Bing Chat right now for free. But what we're talking mostly about is going to be processor server load and access to it. So when people use Bing Chat, a complaint you might hear, or the Bing image generator, is they wish we were faster. And yeah, sure, of course. I mean, but that's done on purpose, right? The idea is you're using this for free. They're not going to bump you first to line because, you're using it. But eventually, when people are paying customers, they will be bumped to priority. And that's already what ChatGPT does. So if you pay for ChatGPT, or you create an account and use a private API, which is what I do, and I use it with a Windows app called Easy Chat AI. I've mentioned that before. It's one word, Easy Chat, and you can put in your ChatGPT API, and I get charged, I don't know, for every like 100 queries, like 5 cents. So it's not expensive, but the performance difference, night and day. It's amazing how fast this stuff is. Like when I type in a query, it just instantly goes. Da, 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 da. I'm like, oh my god! Like it just like will give you everything you want without like a blink of an eye. But when you use Bing Chat, yeah, you got to wait for that delay, right? It's pretty slow, but that will be addressed. So, but yeah, eventually the stuff will be, part of the licensing, Microsoft 365. You see it a little bit with Bing Image Creator. There's credits
Yeah.
already, and they're called boosts, I think. And if you use those boosts, it makes it faster. And you can gain boosts simply by using Bing search, like as gaining credits and stuff. So that's one way to kind of offset costs, which is kind of an interesting one because you're not physically, actually paying for anything, but it's your use of Bing, which they get advertising revenue that way that helps offset costs. And that's a cool, painless way to do this as well, which I think is pretty creative. So, and they may do that, right? For people like I have like 230,000 credits for Bing because I do a lot of search and I just don't redeem them very often. Well, actually, it reminds me, I have a $10 Amazon card I should use. But, uh, if you use Bing and their services, that may be one way to sort of offset this stuff too, which again gets away from the subscription. I got to pay $5 a month or whatever for it.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the Copilot stuff. It is coming. Well, we believe it's going to be part of the version 23H2 release that's coming in the fall. Alongside Copilot, Microsoft actually announced a bunch of other new features that are in the works, likely for the version 23H2 release. Coming in the fall, some of this was air quotes announced during Panos Panay's sort of keynote. That keynote was kind of weird. Panos was on stage, he was doing his thing, telling the emotional story about why Windows is amazing and changed everybody's lives. But it was kind of odd because there were no actual announcements because everything had already been announced. It was all in the blog post. He was just basically rehashing yesterday's news, and I was surprised by that. I kind of thought, they're going to bring Panos out, surely he's going to drop a bombshell, announce something that wasn't in the blog post stuff. That's usually what they've
wheel
done
him out like Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah.
He's got his fancy fuzzy sneakers on.
Yeah he was wearing some strange trainers, sneakers, sorry. But he's nothing. He was out there. He just basically told an emotional story about why Copilot will change the world. Then he'd handed off to a bunch of other people to rehash all the news, and then he came back and said thanks, and that was it. I was convinced because they had some of the terminology they were using, like Rajesh Jha at the beginning of the keynote was like, panels will be talking about the future of Windows. He said the words future of Windows. Then during the keynote there was a brief sort of a view of the widgets board where with the calendar widget. Panos Panay, the next generation of Windows. Lots of keywords and terminology there suggesting they were going to talk about what's coming after Windows 11. I kind of assumed that they were going to start talking about the Windows 12 AI stuff maybe coming next year. None of that. They did nothing outside of what's coming later this year if Windows 11 was talked about, which kind of surprised me. But on that subject...
The real question is, did Paul Thurrott write an editorial talking about how he doesn't like Panos and the way he presents things?
I didn't check.
As he typically does for every Panos event. For some reason, does not like the guy. It's really bizarre.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how you don't like Panos.
Yeah, I think he's fascinating to watch. I admire it because he's unlike any other tech talker, like someone who talks at a tech event. Everyone's kind of other than Craig Federighi at Apple. I love Craig Federighi. He's so charismatic because he's like Panos but in a more energetic way. I think Panos is very low key, whereas Craig quite energetic. But yes, let's go to the 23H2 stuff. We'll start with some news regarding archive formats, which sounds very unexciting until you realize what it actually means is Microsoft is finally bringing inbox support for file formats such as 7-zip and RAR. So for many years now, if you wanted to unpack a 7-zip file or a RAR file, you'd have to go and download 7-zip or WinRAR and pay for it after 30 days, as everybody I'm sure did.
Shareware.
But now you won't need to do that. Windows will just natively support creating and extracting 7-zip and RAR files, as well as a couple others. I think TAR is one of them, which is amazing. That's going to basically reduce the need to download those third-party programs to zero. I'm not sure how Microsoft sold this idea to the developers of 7-zip and WinRAR, but Hey, there we are. Is this like, is Microsoft paying them a license now is that part of the Windows license fee?
Sorry, guys, we're gonna murder you.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the logistics around the licensing, but that is coming to Windows finally. So that's going to be there in addition to zip files, which is pretty cool. In addition to that, something we have talked about before, RGB devices. We're getting native support for configuring RGB peripherals and devices within Windows 11. So you'll no longer be reliant on the third-party programs to customize the color of your keyboard. Some of those programs are incredibly heavy and bloated. Looking at you, Razer, I hate the Razer software for configuring their stuff. It's so heavy. It's really
I criticized
bloated.
it in my Noma review.
Yeah.
I was like, it's chonk. It's a
really
big
bad.
application, and it does have some issues on
And so
occasion
if you
for
just want
stability.
to, change the color of your keyboard now, you don't have to download that program. You can just jump into Windows settings and do it through the native Windows UI, and that's pretty cool. Obviously, it won't be as complex as the third-party software, but for basic controls and stuff, which I think is what most people only care about, this is going to be fantastic. Taskbar, app ungrouping, and show labels is coming back. Now, in the blog post, they presented this kind of weirdly. They announced it as like, oh, it's now a one-click thing. So, it's normally grouped, and then you can press a button, and it'll briefly ungroup them for you so you can see what app you're looking for. But in the insider build that just went live today, that's not how that works. It's just a toggle, just like it used to be in old Windows, where you can turn it to, not combine, and it doesn't combine them anymore. So maybe they're still working on that one-click solution. But yes, ungrouping app icons on the taskbar is coming back. I don't know anybody who wants that. Personally, I know it was a big feedback request from lots of people. I don't know who you people are. You must be over 40, right? Because, like,
Hey,
who's using that feature? That's an old school Windows feature from before the Windows 7 days.
sorry, I was looking at an email. Ungrouping on the taskbar. I don't even know what that means. So you can create groups.
No, so ever since Windows 7 with the super bar, as it was called, the new taskbar where you open multiple instances of an app, it opens under one icon, doesn't it? And you don't see the label of it. It's just the icon. That wasn't the case before Windows 7. Before it, every icon would, it was a titled sort of bar along the bottom, and and the app would just open, and you'd see all the instances next to each other within the taskbar. That hasn't been the case, or by default, since Windows 7. Though Windows 7, 8, and 10 did have the option to never combine on the superbar. That went away with Windows 11. It's now coming back. But again, who are these people who are still using show labels on the taskbar? I don't know who you are.
Yeah, it is weird because I have a couple instances of Edge open, and yeah, like you hover over the icon, you get the little preview window, which what sort of obviously streamlines your taskbar. I guess, yeah, I mean, I guess I see value in having multiple ones where it would be slightly faster to toggle, I guess, but yeah, you know my rule on this stuff. As long as it's an option, totally fine with it.
Yeah. That's good. They are bringing back that option. They put time and effort into bringing that back on the new Windows 11 taskbar, and it's now official in preview testing now, and will likely roll out as part of 23H2 later in the year. Also announced at Build, again, they sort of worded this weirdly. They announced it as a Microsoft Store feature, but it's not. It's actually, well, kind of is. It's actually its own app. Microsoft has announced Windows Backup as a thing, and it's a dedicated app which you can test in the latest Insider Preview build, which will back up your system settings, your wallpaper, your apps, and your passwords and stuff. And it's an actual backup app. You hit backup, and it backs up to the cloud. It backs up to your OneDrive. It says in the app, how much OneDrive storage you've got. And how this actually works is it's not backing up your apps to the cloud. It's just telling. It's saving a file. I believe it's saving a file in the cloud that tells Windows to check the Microsoft Store. Yeah, to ping that file to say, hey, these are the programs this user was using on this other PC. Install them through the Microsoft Store, and that's why they announced it as a Microsoft Store feature. So it only works with Microsoft Store apps, and I briefly tested it earlier today. It didn't even work for the apps that are hosted off the store but listed in the store, like Firefox. I think Firefox is one of those apps where you can find it in the store, but it's hosted on Firefox's own servers. That did not get pulled in with the backup, but Spotify and WhatsApp did, because they're, you download them from Microsoft Store servers. That could change. I don't see why the manifest couldn't tell the store to pull the Firefox stuff, because it's listed in the store, right? I don't see why not. Again, this is in early preview now, but it's really awesome to see this finally, because as you're setting up, you'll get a prompt within the out-of-box experience. Would you like to restore from a previous PC? You hit yes. By the time you hit your desktop, all of your pins that you had on your previous PC are back on the taskbar in the start menu, and the Microsoft Store is working hard to download them in the background, which is really cool. Did you have a question?
No, well, I already see that when I'm setting up new laptops, do you want to restore from a different PC?
Yes,
Is that
but it
what
doesn't
that's
do
doing?
apps. Yeah, it doesn't
Okay,
do
I was going
apps
to
yet.
say, I didn't
Yeah.
think it did. Yeah, I was talking to, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, Giorgio Asardo, who's in charge of the Microsoft Store. And I was just like, thank you for bringing that feature back. This is how people use all devices, right? If you set up a new Android phone that
Absolutely,
you're transferring it, it does the same thing. You know, you want, and it gives you, sometimes even they'll just put the icon there and then they start to download. Apple does this obviously, because the problem is your memory. So
Right.
when you're setting up a new computer, and I actually have the numbers on this because I interviewed Giorgio yesterday, it's something like 40% of like the apps get like people remember which apps to reinstall. You know, so there's a lot of that people leave off simply because they forget, because you're looking at your computer, and this is a memory interference thing I learned a long time ago. Like if I'm looking at like text on my screen or images and I'm trying to recall something else, I have a much more difficult time because it's interfering with my recall because I'm taking in information at the same time. But when you're looking at your computer and you're setting something up and you're like, wait, what apps did I have installed? And you'll remember the big ones, the one you use every day, but then there's going to be like the smaller ones. Like for instance, I used to, before they built in the new screen recorder, which is brilliant. I use that all the time now. I would use Screen Bits. But I always forgot the name. I forgot what it was called. Screen Bits. So not only would I have to remember that I had the program that did this thing that I liked, but then I had to remember its name. And if I didn't use it very often, I wouldn't necessarily remember what it was even called. So this idea that like now it's going to just like populate your start menu with those icons and it starts down. For me, that is just like, and I'm sure a lot of people, from Windows 8 did this, and it was just like, it was a way better experience. So I'm really, really glad that they brought that back. I think that's going to be a huge feature that a lot of people will be happy with.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Windows 8 because a lot of this stuff is really just bringing back Windows 8 features. People took it for granted at the time, but Windows 8 was like a complete product at launch. It wasn't like this work in progress thing. It was, here's our vision. We basically...
It just didn't have apps.
It just didn't have the apps, right? Yeah, it couldn't back up nothing or restore anything because it had no apps. But yeah, no, Windows 8 was awesome. Anyway, a couple of more things here. We have the File Explorer stuff. Now, this hasn't technically, air quotes, been announced, but they did briefly show it off during the keynote. The new File Explorer, they're working on an updated UI for it, which basically makes the header more like a sort of web browser. It has an address bar with a search bar, back, forward, home buttons there, and then all of the sort of File Explorer controls are below the address bar. They're also working on WinUI 3 versions of the folder view and the sidebar. We've already seen the details pane. It's all coming. It's all more Windows 11 consistent. But yes, that's something they did show off in the keynote. So that's officially coming at this point. I believe you can even enable an early version of it in the latest preview build unofficially. And then lastly, Windows widgets. Now, this was, I guess, a surprise announcement because this wasn't in the blog post or anything. But during the Panos Panay keynote, one of the presenters was just she was racing through all of these things. She was like, quick, here's this, here's that, here's that. And then she briefly talked about Windows widgets. So it's like, hey, we're going to be adding new layouts later this year. Users will be able to choose between having the widgets on the side next to the feed, and then having them mixed with the feed, and then also a widgets only feed. So you will finally be able to turn off the MSN feed if you don't like it. Lots of people I know have complained that the MSN feed in the widgets board is trash. It always shows them stories they don't want to see. They're hiding them, but this more trash shows up later. So for those of you who have that complaint, later this year, Microsoft will be releasing an update to the widgets board that will allow you to configure between different layouts, some without the MSN feed. And that, I think, is a big deal for lots of people who kind of like the idea of widgets, but don't use them because the MSN feed is just like forced in your face. I agree, it's kind of messy. It is the fact that it's previously was all mixed was always weird to me, but now in the Moment 3 update, which just came out, it's separated. I'm looking at mine right now, and on the right we have the MSN feed, and on the left is where the widgets are. And so I can just see where the widgets are. I don't even have to look at the MSN feed now. But like I said, later this year, they will be making it so you can turn that feed off entirely and just have the whole thing be widgets. Are you excited for that, Dan? I think you like MSN secretly, don't you?
I don't mind. Yeah, I'm not as harsh on MS. I get the criticism. I'm not saying that people are wrong in the criticism. I will say the more you use MSN, the more the news gets tailored for you. That doesn't mean, though, it's not necessarily tabloid kind of trashy stuff. But for me, as a time waster, and I just want to like just read dumb movie stuff and rumors about Hollywood stars, I do like it. That said, I don't like it necessarily in the widget panel. I don't use it there. I use it with the new tab in Edge all the time. When I open up my new tab, I'm like, oh, cool, stories, and I'll just scroll through that. But I don't do it with the widget panel. So that said, like I am looking forward to get rid of the MSN News in the widget panel and just have the widget panel. I just want it to be widgets that are functional for my PC. And so as we got more of those, like there's Spotify, which we'll see how much we use. There's the Your Phone, phone link kind of thing, and there's your calendar. As more of those happen, I think it's going to be definitely way cooler to use. But I think what's even cooler about that is going to be pinning those widgets to your desktop. I think that's really the next level. I think that's going to be kind of way more interesting.
Yeah, sadly they didn't announce that build, but as far as I'm aware, that is still in the works and will be coming at some point. I'm assuming this may be a Windows VNet thing at this point, because you would have thought that they would have just announced it now if it was coming in the fall.
See, like right now, I'm looking at MSN News. Robert Downey Jr. back as Iron Man. New photo has fans excited. I want to click that. Mark Cuban calls out Elon Musk on Twitter after a snide political tweet. Oh, I'm going to read that one. It knows my Elon Musk it's always surfacing negative news on him. It's really funny. Brilliant. Matt Damon and Emily Blunt rave about Oppenheimer star Cillian Murphy. Like, oh, I want to see that movie so bad. So yeah, I actually like MSN News. Whatever. But
see, but that's because you curate it. You spent time telling him what you don't like, what you do like. It's learnt you, so now it does surface things.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is literally just clicking things. Like it'll do that. I don't necessarily go through, because you're right. There's a thumbs up, thumbs down kind of thing. I can't say I have actively done a lot of that, although that would make it even better. So I think that's important to be concerned about. But yeah.
So that's basically the 23H2 rundown. This is stuff we can expect to see roll out in the fall, likely September, October timeframe. We talked last week about Moment 3. We're not going to go through that again, but that's now, air quotes, available. It's now available as an optional update in Windows Update. So if you head to Windows Update, you may not see it because A/B testing. But if you go to Windows Update, you may see a banner at the top which says download the May 25th optional cumulative update preview. If you don't see it there, you can go into advanced options, optional updates, and it might be in there. And if you don't see it there, then it's just not available to you yet. However, if you don't see it there, don't fret. It will be available to everybody starting June 13th. It'll be rolled into the Patch Tuesday release coming out in June. So
I always tell people no. Instead, angry tweet at Panos about why you don't have it.
There's not much in Moment 3 anyway, so it's not a big deal if you don't have it.
Animated weather icon.
That's true. We do have the animated weather icons.
That's all I needed to know.
Nothing else.
And seconds in the time for the clock. Who wants that? I guess someone whose job is to. Well, I do like to show up I like to show up at meetings at exactly .00, just to be that guy. But yeah, I don't know. It's weird.
Yes, so that's the 23H2 stuff. And now, Dan, it's your turn to talk about the Microsoft Store.
Whee! Yes, I did. I interviewed Giorgio Sardo yesterday. I'm going to be writing that up soon. And I talked to him. It was about a year and a half ago, back when Windows 11 was still coming online. It was brand new and had the brand new store. And that store is cool because a lot of the people that made very popular UWP apps on the Windows Phone days are now on that team. And so if you want to see, I think the Microsoft Store is sort of like a good example of like what apps should look like on Windows and using all the tools and stuff like that. So the store has been updated again. And so we're talking a little bit about that, including some of the features. There is still, I would say, some minor issues with the store. It does take a little bit too long to load on initial launch than I would prefer. But they're aware of that, and I think they're trying to optimize the code and all that. So we'll see what happens there. But so one of the cool things they did was, if you remember when you launched the store, there's a big what they call the spotlight, and it's a big graphic right in the center, highlighting some new movie or new game out there, and it's usually really pretty looking. The problem they had with it, though, was it was so big and beautiful that people didn't scroll over to the right because there were like 7 other things on there. So what they've done now, and when you open the store, at least on my preview version here, you still get the spotlight feature, but now there's kind of like you see 2 other spotlights. One is shrunk down, and then there's a little edge of another one, letting you know that if you scroll over, there's going to be much more stuff there. And it looks really nice. You can also, of course, hit the little dots at the bottom, which is another familiar UI element. They're doing, I would say a little bit more connected graphics. Now, when you go to like movies and stuff like that, and you hover over them, that it does this cool pop out, and it'll even start playing the trailer for you. It just looks really, really pretty. In fact, I bought a movie last night. Speaking of a movie, actually, because I'll forget it, here's the thing of the week. Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves was amazing. And I'm not a Dungeons and Dragons fan at all, but that movie was hilarious, entertaining, and just one of the most fun movies I've seen in a really long time. So definitely, I would go rent that, buy it. It was funny. It was $19.99 to rent, but I was splitting it with my best friend, so it was fine. But it was like $25 to buy it. I was just like, it's an extra $5.
Yeah.
Like, should I just buy it? But I ended up not, and now I was just like, I should have kind of maybe bought it for an extra $5. I wish at the end of the movie they should be like, hey, if you act right now, you can buy this movie for an extra $5. Could you imagine the upsell on that? I totally would have done it. But they don't, so whatever. But great movie, go watch it. But yeah, so that's one of the big changes they did with the store. There's, as you mentioned earlier, there's of course now the restore ability when you set up a new PC, which is kind of cool. My thing with the Android app, specifically the Amazon store, is really kind of interesting. I've been skeptical of that whole thing. Like, I think for developers, it's an interesting option, but I'm like wondering who's actually using it. I will say I did launch the Amazon store like yesterday for the first time in a very long time, or I just launched the Kindle app, which I have installed. I was actually surprised by how quickly it loaded. They really did improve a lot of the performance of this stuff. That wasn't there before. Now, granted, I was on my Core i9 processor, but still, like, I know how it was when it came out. It still took a long time to sort of load apps and stuff like that. Now it felt native. It just felt like an app loading. I was actually pretty surprised. But now they have over 50,000 Android apps and games from the Amazon store. Granted, a lot of that stuff I wouldn't consider necessarily the cream of the crop for Android apps, but there's a lot of games on there. And I imagine for the tablets, there's a lot of talk, touch is becoming a bigger thing, and tablets may be kind of coming back with Windows. Like, having these kind of games, especially for kids, I would say is probably a big deal. Well, at least for the parents it is. It's available in 30 markets. For the movies, they just crossed over 1 million movies available through the Microsoft Store, which is interesting because I'm a big fan of the movies thing on the Microsoft Store. They offer the movies anywhere. It's cool now, too, because it shows you multiple places to watch that movie. Like if you have Amazon Prime or it's on Disney, it gives you that link and you can just go right to it, which is really clever. I bought a lot of things on there because I like to, when I travel, I bring up my movies and TV app and I'll just download stuff for the flights. And that's how I watch most things. And of course, if you have Xbox, it works there as well, too. But they've had the reason I'm bringing this up is because that was the one thing I heard for years that people were expecting Microsoft to drop, because they dropped music with Zune, which was later Groove Music. Before that, it was Xbox Music. But they dropped that. But I always mentioned how that was a completely different model that relied on a monthly subscription. It was an all-you-can-eat. So the numbers there were crazy because you had to pay this fee every month, and it covered the entire catalog. and the margins there were pretty thin. And when Spotify just kind of got really big and kind of pushed everyone out, it didn't really make sense, especially since Windows Phone was gone. But the movies works differently, right? Because it's on a per thing, right? I just mentioned if you're going to like now you can rent a movie basically right after it came out in the theaters, and you're going to pay $20 for it. But that's still cheaper than a lot of people for going to a movie theater, especially if you're using, you have your family watching it. But and then you can also buy movies. They have sales. What did I? Oh, I just bought War of the Worlds, the Tom Cruise Spielberg version, which is a great movie, except for the farmhouse scene and the ending where the kid survives. They should have killed the son, but whatever. But it was $4.99, and I love that movie. So I was like, oh, $4.99, click and buy. So the store is actually, it's doing well for the movie stuff. A lot of people are engaging with it, so that's that's not going to go away. They're seeing much higher engagement with all this stuff. They have over 1 billion customers. They made things easier for gamers with Game Pass. So now if you see a game in the store and it's included with your Game Pass, it notifies you of that. You can just click and go into it. And they're working a lot on search, right? So this was always a big thing when the store first came out. Search used to be really bad on the Microsoft Store, but now it's gotten smarter in terms of understanding even your intent, even if you're not necessarily you got the name wrong or what you're actually looking for. But like they've done a really, if you remember back in the day, right, the store had a lot of garbage apps in there and clone apps. You type in WhatsApp and it would be these weird guides on how to use WhatsApp, and it wasn't the app itself, and they'd be charging people. Like now it's really good at filtering that out and it's surfacing right away. In fact, as you start typing like WhatsApp, it'll just bring it up in the suggestion, you just click right to it. I also really like how if you do Bing search for an app, one of the first things that pop up is if it's in the Microsoft Store, it'll give you that info and you can just click install, and does that applet install, which is really kind of nice. So they're doing quite a lot there. The big thing, of course, was the AI, being part of the store. So it's AI is included in kind of like 2 ways, or maybe even 3. One is now there's going to be an AI hub, and all this is it's going to be a separate section. You have home, you would have apps, you would have gaming, then you have movies and TV, and then there'll be AI. And when you click that, it's going to basically just be apps. High quality apps, right? I don't think if you just put like AI in your title, like it's just going to pop up there. You have to actually, I believe, request to be included into it. But there's already quite a lot of apps out there. I use Topaz Labs for a lot of my stuff. I don't know if they're going to be in the store, but there's a lot of these professional, semi-professional apps used for photo and video editing and camera manipulation like Lensa that will be there. So you can go to this section and you'll just see apps that leverage AI, which is going to be kind of really cool, right? Because these are going to be way more powerful than your typical photo app. It's going to do a lot more stuff. Some of them may rely on NPUs. I asked this question, and that'll be up to developers. If they decide like, listen, our app only works the way we want it to if your computer has a built-in NPU, neural processing unit, which is a separate sub-processor used for, assisting with AI calculations, they could do that and restrict the app to that. But they could also be like, no, we don't care. If it doesn't use the NPU, it'll fall back to like the CPU or GPU usage, which is ideal for laptops. And, you don't necessarily want the whole part with the NPU is you don't want AI to be like consuming 80% of your CPU or GPU resources, because you may be trying to do other things and you don't want your computer to get slow. So where an NPU is specifically designed for these tasks, and won't rob your CPU and GPU of performance, which is kind of nice. So you're going to start to see that, which is going to be really nice. They're also using AI basically for search and surfacing up content, which is going to be really good. I asked, about the AI, like when did they start with this stuff? And I didn't get a direct answer on that one, of course, but it's clear now that I think Microsoft didn't just throw this stuff together, right? They've been playing this stuff for a while. And I should also mention, Giorgio said that, they didn't put AI here for the sake of AI. They actually used it to solve problems for them. and problems for customers. And so like another feature that's coming out is, this is a clever one. We've talked about Bing Chat, its ability to summarize. So they're taking that and it's going to summarize store reviews. So say there's an app, popular one like Amazon Prime Video or WhatsApp or Telegram or whatever, and it's got like, 500 reviews. You do get the overall star rating, which is pretty helpful. But what Bing is going to do, or their AI chat thing, is just going to summarize all those reviews and give you a concise little subparagraph thing, being like, here's what the general take of this app is from people who have used it. And that's actually really clever, and that's a smart way to do things. Instead of, yeah, you can go through, read 3 or 4 pages of reviews, you can sort by highest ranking versus lowest ranking, and then try to do it in your head, like, all right, that seems to be the gist of it. Or you could just read this gist, an actual gisting of the store reviews. I think that's a really kind of clever way of using their own technology to make things better for customers. Also makes things better for developers, right? But yeah, they're also doing other things. PWAs are still getting big. There's now the ability, PWAs for developers will have the ability to have in-app purchases that like link to your Microsoft account, which is actually another really cool advancement. But they see 3 times usage of PWA increase since Windows 11. So they're seeing a lot of adoption of PWA. I'm a huge fan of it, obviously. I asked whether or not Google, because if you go to like Google Maps, YouTube TV, and your web browser, you can create PWAs out of all of that. So I always tell people like, oh, there's a YouTube app for Windows. There's a YouTube TV app for Windows. You just got to do the PWA installation thing. Google, if they wanted to, could just package those and put them into the store. But being Google, they haven't done that. I asked, like, could Microsoft just do that for them? Probably not. They've had problems with Google in the past there. And so, yeah, so it doesn't look like it's something that's going to happen. But they said, listen, the store is completely open. If Google wants to put this stuff in there, they're absolutely free to do so. But this is Google. I still hate how they're kind of jerks about this stuff.
Yeah.
Like, it's weird because it's not that they don't want Windows users to use it, right? Like, you could just use a web browser and go to YouTube or watch YouTube TV or use Google Maps or Google Sheets. Like, you can do all that already in Windows. So why not just install PWAs so people could use that stuff even more? Like, what's the argument against that? I don't know. It's weird. But they could have done that 8 months ago, a year ago, and they still haven't done it. So you can do it yourself. But obviously, I think the adoption and usage rate would be way higher for Google's own products if they just had it in the store.
It's the same story with Chrome ARM, right? Like, Google has a
Yeah.
version of Chrome for ARM. They just won't release it for Windows. I think Google does it because they like the optics of it in regards to it looks like they don't see Windows as a big enough thing to care about, which is dumb because Chrome is only popular because of Windows. But that's kind of how they want people to look at what they're doing. It's like, Google won't support what Microsoft is doing because they don't see it as vital, I think is why they do it.
Yeah. It's a bizarre position. They just always have done this with Microsoft for whatever reason. And Microsoft is, always taking the higher road. They always try to play fair with Google, but it is what it is. So yeah, that's a kind of the update on the Microsoft Store. There's just a lot of cool stuff that's going on, a lot of momentum with it. It looks really nice. They're getting more and more apps in there. Hopefully we'll see more. But yeah, there's just a lot of neat stuff around it. So
real quick before we move on from the subject, I was speaking to a couple of people months back now about a feature that it wasn't a greenlit feature, it was more of an experiment they were doing internally, but they had a build of the Microsoft Store that used like a camera to analyze your face and recommend movies based on your face or like your emotions or something. I believe it was something, I can't remember now what it really was.
It scans my face and it's like horror.
Yeah, right.
Like,
I think I can't remember the specifics around it, but I think it might have been a hackathon thing. I don't know, but they had a version of the Microsoft Store where it was using like a camera or something to analyze the person and present them or present the recommendations for movies and apps based on that, which I thought was hilarious and awesome. And that would be a great AI feature for Windows 12 if they ever decided to greenlight it, but I don't think I don't think that's the thing that they're going to work on.
Scant
But
your
it's
coming
yeah.
coming out movies.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, what are you trying to tell me?
Yeah, but that would be. I think that would be amazing. But yeah, no, I some of this AI stuff is cool. Like the record when I read that they were doing the reviews thing, like summarizing reviews, that's a great idea because there's usually you see this on Amazon for example, you see like 100 5-star reviews and 100 1-star reviews. What the hell are the 1-star reviews for? So the AI would be able to be like, most people think it's this and it's cool. However, this and this are things people have complained about, and I think that's a really nice sort of overview of how of an app or a movie and stuff. So that's going to be pretty nice, and I bet other storefronts copy this at some point.
Oh yeah,
No way.
yeah, because it's just a smart idea that I
Yeah.
think. I mean, like I said, you could still go read all the reviews individually,
Exactly. Yeah.
but this nice little summary will appear below it and it'll just do the work for you. I think that's really brilliant.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next topic real quick. We have the Microsoft Edge news. So there's nothing too huge here. Main thing really is there's a new UI coming, at least for our audience. There's a new UI coming. It's the same-ish UI that they unveiled when they announced Bing Chat back in February, I think it was. There's been some minor tweaks to it that the border around web pages is less obvious and in your face now, which is kind of cool. It's still there, so it's still a bit weird, but it's no longer those giant thick borders that they had before. They've also
what were the borders were you talking about?
So around web pages, they've got like that thick border now. It's just a border. Nothing more to say about it really. But yes, that's now on its way. Now all of these announcements, they're for the next version of Edge, Edge 1.14, which doesn't roll out until I want to say June 1st. I think it's next week.
But it's
in
Edge Dev, right?
It's in Edge Dev, yes. It's in Edge Dev, it's in Edge Beta, it's in Edge Canary. It's in all of the edges except stable. It's coming to stable in the next week or so. But yes, that new UI is on its way. They've also announced the Microsoft 365 Copilot is coming to Microsoft Edge. This is mainly for enterprises, I think. And it's really no different than Bing Chat. It's just it hooks into Office Online and stuff a little bit more, which is kind of cool. Then there's lots of Microsoft Edge businessy stuff, which we won't get into. Edge Workspaces will be shipping as well. I didn't actually know this was a thing. It was announced ages ago. Edge Workspaces, for those who don't know, is a feature that allows people to sort of get on a call and share one version of Edge and switch between tabs and stuff and basically do like a group project in a browser, which I think is really cool. That's going to be really handy for workplaces and schools. There is also, let's see here. That's actually basically most of the stuff. Oh yes, WebView 2 is coming to HoloLens and Xbox. That was one of the announcements they made at Build. That's a big deal because up until now, I believe it's in preview for HoloLens 2 already, but Xbox has been stuck with Edge HTML, which is the old Edge UWP engine, which is, for Xbox maybe it's okay, but for apps it's a bit of a problem, especially app developers who are wanting to push the boundaries of Edge HTML to Chromium or whatever it's called, Blink. And so WebView 2 will allow developers to update their web apps on Xbox to use that new rendering engine, which is really quite nice. And I believe that's all the sort of big news for Edge. So yeah, nothing too amazing here, just the new UI. I think the UI looks really nice. It's it has rounded tabs along the top. Your user profile gets moved into the top left, and it really sort of prioritizes the Bing Chat stuff on the right, which is interesting. You can actually turn that off now. When it first came out, it was just there and you couldn't disable it. But if you don't like the Bing Chat icon in the address bar, you can finally get rid of it in the latest builds, which is pretty cool. And then we move on to Bing Chat and sort of Copilot stuff itself. We'll really skim over this stuff. There's a lot more in depth that other people can talk about better than me. But basically, the gist of it is the Copilot plugin platform, Microsoft sort of talked about this a bit already, will be shared with ChatGPT. So if you're a developer building a plugin for ChatGPT, that plugin will be something that can be used with Bing Chat or Microsoft 365 Copilot or Windows Copilot. Same thing, if you build for the Windows Copilot, that same plugin can be applied to ChatGPT. It shares the same extensible platform, and that's a big deal for a number of reasons. It's a big deal for developers because it means they only have to really build once and deploy everywhere.
Yeah,
so
that's a big deal.
Yeah, if you're a lot, excuse me, I don't know why I keep coughing. If ChatGPT, that's massive, right? And if developers are building plugins for that, Microsoft now benefits from that because they could just be like, by the way, it works over here too, and that's going to be really quite amazing. And again, if you're building for Windows, it's cool. You get the added benefit of supporting 20 million or however many million users already use ChatGPT. So win-win for everybody. And it also avoids ecosystems. You don't want AI ecosystems competing with each other. We're going to already see it with Microsoft versus Google because Google's doing its own thing in its own siloed container. I would be surprised if Google announces that plugins for Bard will work on ChatGPT and whatnot.
Right.
But maybe we'll see. Maybe they'll surprise us.
No.
So yes.
We just talked about how they won't even put their own apps into the Microsoft Store. Like, why would they do anything that gives a boost to OpenAI and Microsoft?
Yeah. And then lastly, again, this wasn't technically new, but I don't think many people noticed it when they announced it originally. But ChatGPT, when it comes to searching the web, ChatGPT 4 recently got the ability to search the internet like Bing does. That uses Bing. They are intertwined. So if you do a search, query using ChatGPT, if you're somebody who hates Microsoft, doesn't want anything to do with Microsoft, only uses ChatGPT, and you do a search query, it will use Bing to pull in that information for you. And that's a big win for Microsoft once again. Obviously, ChatGPT being the biggest large language module out there currently, millions of users, that's a big win for Bing, which I assume will likely increase their share somewhat. And again, if you're a developer pinging ChatGPT APIs for your own app and whatnot, that's now going to use Bing if it's doing an internet query. So,
and to be clear, to update people, and correct me if I'm wrong, ChatGPT's model and information was like locked at the end of 2021. And that was always kind of a big difference between it and Bing Chat. Bing Chat, you could be like, tell me about the score of the baseball game that just happened 5 minutes ago, and it'll be able to get you that information, where ChatGPT is like, what baseball game? But now that's going to be basically fixed with this, right? They're basically allowing ChatGPT to rely on Bing to pull in extra information. So they're almost kind of like reverse versions of each other, but the difference would still be Bing Chat has its Prometheus model, which has a little bit more different types of guardrails that suit Microsoft's desire for how this stuff should work.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, okay. That is fully correct. I'm just reading here that they've already announced a bunch of plugins between ChatGPT and Microsoft stuff. There's just looking here, Cloudflare's there. We've got Oracle's there, Smartsheet, Twilio, Trip.com, TripAdvisor, ServiceNow. I'm not going to name them all, but there is a lot. Instacart's there. TeamViewer. I believe Spotify's there, or it's coming. Spotify's there, so you will be able to be like, hey, recommend me a playlist, and it'll just do that. That's really cool. So that's all the big news for the Bing stuff. There wasn't actually a lot of Bing stuff here, and I think that's because they've run out of announcements. I feel like every month they've had Bing announcements, and now they're like losing steam. Like, it's basically everything. There's nothing more to talk about anymore. So that's good. I think that shows a sign of like the service is maturing and whatnot. And that's basically our rundown of all the stuff in our list here. I real quick just want to circle back to the Windows stuff. There was something I missed. Dev Home and Dev Drive were two features that were announced for Windows as well. Dev Home is an app for developers. Basically, developers have complained that it takes a while to set up a new dev machine for developing apps or developing software. You install Windows, blank slate. Now what do you got to do? Install Visual Studio, got to install Visual Code, this, that, and the other. All these frameworks and tools and stuff that you're going to need. It takes a while. It can take hours, days even, depending on how massive your workload is. Dev Home is supposed to streamline that. You'll be able to use winget to create a sort of configuration file that just tells Windows what to download automatically. You can configure that through the Dev Home app. You can also link it up to GitHub, and it'll tell you recent changes in projects and stuff. Gives you an overview of your PC, how powerful it is, what the CPU load is, this, that, and the other. Really quite nice. So it should really streamline that setup process for dev machines, developers using Windows to build apps. One of the big sort of key takeaways from this build, and I believe previous builds as well, is that Microsoft wants Windows to be the best platform for developers. They want developers to choose Windows to build stuff. I think Microsoft is kind of worried that developers are more and more using Linux or using Mac OS to do things, which doesn't benefit Microsoft in the slightest. If Microsoft builds Windows to be the best development platform, or the best platform for developers, it means that Windows remains included when a developer considers an app, when they're building stuff like, we'll include Windows as well because I build on Windows, so why wouldn't I do that? Whereas if there are people choosing Linux and Mac OS, they're not going to be like, we'll add Windows, because I think that's what Microsoft was primarily worried about. And then Dev Drive is basically a ReFS partition that you can set up as a developer, where you can save all your project stuff. It's useful for projects with loads of files, hundreds of thousands of files. Apparently, it can offer 30% performance increase for projects with loads of files, because I think it can just pass through them quicker. I'm not too sure on the technical aspects of it, but that's the thing that's coming with 23H2 as well. I think the Dev Home app applies to 22H2, and you can install it from the Microsoft Store, but the dev dry stuff is 23H2. And then very lastly, we want to just quickly mention that avatars on Microsoft Teams was announced and is now generally available for business and enterprise licenses. So yeah, the Metaverse was here. It was a very small part of Build, but the Metaverse stuff was still here. Microsoft is still doing that stuff within Teams. They announced avatars. They announced some more 3D stuff with HoloLens and VR headsets. So if you thought the Metaverse was dead, you're wrong. It's just no longer a focus for any big tech company because everyone's now focused on AI. I bet Facebook's gutted. They bet on the wrong horse big time.
Yeah, well, that's also I'm really curious about Apple. You know, they're doing their WWDC, whatever it is, pretty soon. And, you know, this seems to be the one. We're finally going to see their AR, VR headset after talking about it for 2 years. And, you know, I'll be clear. I think it's going to be amazing hardware. I think the software is going to be great. I think we're going to be generally wowed about it. I think we're going to get a lot of people on Twitter being like, this is what HoloLens should have been. And maybe they're not wrong, but also it's just bizarre. First of all, I want to know, does Apple even talk about AI at this event? Like, where are they in this discussion, right? Because right now you have Microsoft and OpenAI who are just so ahead in the game. Like Microsoft's like, putting it in everywhere. And they're not like, here's a concept of what we want to do. They're like, no, the code is almost ready to ship. You know, sometimes it's actually shipping now and we're getting it right away. Sometimes it's coming in a couple of weeks and months, but it is in advanced stages where Google is like, oh, Bard? and then, you know, they came out a couple of weeks ago at their event and said, oh, we're putting in all this stuff into Google Documents. And you know, it was expected and their stock went up through the roof for it, but there's like no ETA on that and all that kind of stuff. And then it's like Apple, like, what do they plan to do? They've had Siri now for like over a decade and still sucks. And it's like, is that going to get better? And there's still this there's this thing with Apple people who are like, just give them the benefit of that. Like, don't worry, they got this. They've been working on it in secret. It's like, all right, where's the evidence for that? And there's like, well, there is no evidence for that, you know, but maybe they are. But it's just funny that there's like literally nothing. They haven't talked about it at all. So I'll be curious if they're going to talk about that at the Apple event. The VR AR thing, like I said, it's going to be interesting. It's supposed to be around $3,000. I think people are going to want it, but it's going to be mostly devs at first. But I don't know. You see where AR VR has been in the last couple of years. It's like any moment now. This is it. This is gonna be the moment. And then like last year was all the moment. It's like, no, it's gonna be called the Metaverse. And oh god. And I saw all these articles. It's like, oh, estimates say that the Metaverse will generate $18 billion by 2024. And it's just like all this like stuff. And it's just like it just fell flat. And then AI took over. You know. So is Apple betting on the wrong thing here? And don't get me wrong. I think a couple of years from now, we all want these smart glasses we put on and it brings up information, all that. And this is a road, the first step down that road. So I don't think they're wrong there and they have a great story, but like, I don't think this device is necessarily going to be the next Apple Watch, especially at $3,000. Now that price will come down. But is that where everything's going right now? I feel like Microsoft has a little bit more of an interesting roadmap. But who knows? It's going to be kind of fun to watch, I think. So
yeah, no, I will say Microsoft really got lucky here with the whole AI thing because you know we've been saying for years Microsoft is slowly maybe falling into a bit of irrelevancy in regards to the big tech giants. You know, there's consumer interest in Google, there's consumer interest in Apple. Microsoft was losing that consumer interest, but this is a lifeline. You know, the AI stuff benefits everybody. It doesn't just benefit enterprises, which is kind of where Microsoft's been focused in its efforts. AI benefits us individually, personally. It can help you write a letter to a loved one. It can help you create invitations. It can do things with people outside of work. And Microsoft has inserted itself at the very front of this new sort of market, I guess, to innovate, air quotes, innovate, because I know ChatGPT did it all first. Microsoft has now been like, hey, they haven't bought ChatGPT, of course, but they're like, that tech is awesome. Can we use some of that? And that's what they've been doing. And now Microsoft looks like it's innovating because, you know, they're the first to announce things like Bing Chat and bringing it to an OS like Windows and all this other stuff. And then when Google announces this stuff, it's old news. You know, Google announced all the bar stuff at I.O. Ideally, if Microsoft hadn't done that, that would have been amazing demos. Everyone's like, oh, this is incredible. How is it doing it? But because Microsoft did this in February, it's like, yeah, they've just caught up. Well, okay, great. What's next? Which is rare for Microsoft to be able to do that, be like, and have it be something people actually are interested in. Microsoft has been first to a lot of industries and fumbled the execution. So far, I think Microsoft has done this well, that they've capitalized on the press interest. They did that whole special event in February. They were like, hey, here's Bing Chat. It's available now, more or less. Then they didn't do that with Copilot in Office, but that's fine. They still got that initial sort of impression done well with Bing Chat, and now everything else just falls into place. Windows is getting it next month. People are interested, and this is, I think, for them only going to keep growing. So, yeah, well done, Microsoft.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. The thing with Apple and the AI stuff, I know people are like just giving them the benefit of the doubt, but that's not how large language models work. Like you don't
You
build
got to
them.
train them.
Yeah, you don't build them in your closet.
Yeah.
And like, I worked on this app in secret. Here it is. You need to train them, and you need massive computing power
Yeah.
and data to suck in all the data and do all that stuff. And I don't know if there's any evidence that Apple has necessarily been doing that. It's not to say they don't work on AI. Of course they do. I just don't know if they're, Microsoft has the benefit of Azure. They have their own server farms everywhere. They have their own supercomputer. And they talked about this years ago. I think it was 2020. They teamed up with OpenAI. Said, "Hey, we're training our large language model on our massive supercomputer. We have this deal set up." Like it was all public. We all knew this was technically coming, but there's nothing been like that for Apple. And Google's like AI stuff has been talked about for many years as well. That they have this team that's working on it. So I just don't know where this stuff is for Apple.
Well, what's going to happen is Apple will have to, partner with a cloud company, Microsoft or Google or Azure. They'll be like, hey, we need 50,000 servers. We'll pay you this for it, and whichever company takes that first will be the partnership, right? And I assume, but that's Microsoft's game plan, isn't it? Microsoft is all about Azure. They're at the forefront of this AI stuff. They're building their own platform for it. They won't care about hosting other competitors' AI as long as that you're paying for the servers. AI is their moneymaker. That's what they want to make the most money. So they'll be like, hey, Apple, absolutely, you can have Siri GPT here on Azure. We don't mind. They won't care. They'll be like, yeah, give us that money.
Yeah, and like don't forget, like Apple doesn't do everything. So they did Maps, which started off awful, but they're actually pretty decent now, And the big competitor there was Google. So they can definitely compete when they want to and put a lot of time in there. But they never did it with search, which is fascinating.
Right. Yeah.
Because they don't like Google. They don't like to pay Google, for like using or have Google pay them. They don't want, if they could have their own search, they would absolutely want that because then they can guarantee why. Again, Apple's messaging has always been about privacy, right? And if they had their own search, they can control that data and sell it off as like, hey, you can trust us because we have your data. We're not going to sell it off like those other guys, and they never did that, right? Because starting off your own search engine is not trivial, right? Not that but they could do it. Right? They did Maps, right? So they could if they want to, but they never did. So like without a search engine, I don't know how necessarily you get all this kind of information and training for large language models. That's where Microsoft had a leg up. That's where Google has a leg up. So I don't know. It's going to be kind of fascinating. Do people want to strap on a VR, AR headset in 2023? I know people right now is going to be like, oh, but it's Apple. I'm going to want to. But everything so far has been saying, no, people don't want to do that. People don't want to go to work meetings and put on a headset. Especially, this is supposed to be kind of a big goggle system. It's not going to be like your, Bosch and Loam sunglasses.
It's not what Tim Cook wanted. I was reading a report where apparently, the original vision for this thing was a pair of glasses. That was Tim Cook's vision. He wears glasses. He was like, yep, those, just make what I wear. But obviously the engineers are like, that's not really possible right now. And so the original vision for this device has sort of fallen further and further away from what they originally wanted. And it's now a pair of VR goggles with a battery pack that slips in your pocket, apparently, which is insane.
Yeah, or your
just
belt.
saying that.
Yeah. It's a battery, and I think some of the computing power is in that thing too. Yeah. I think what people were thinking was, and even what I was thinking was like, oh, this thing will use your iPhone and maybe your Apple Watch, and it'll be all kind of connected. It doesn't seem to be that, but we'll see. I don't know. But yeah, the rumor is it's a big headset, a ton of cameras. What's been holding it back is it overheats and it gets really hot. Yeah. And so they've had to rework the thermals and the battery life. And yeah, it does have this like wired pack you have to wear. Like, is this the future people want right now? But again, it's the first step
It's
down
the
that
first
road,
gen
right?
one, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like it will obviously improve and they'll have that kind of leg up, but I think it's still an interesting question of like, is this what people want? Maybe at the end of the day, like I said, we want those glasses you just put on. But even then, what's it doing? Like,
It's a HUD.
yeah, so it gets your phone notifications.
It's
Cool.
cool.
I mean, I don't wear a smartwatch now because I got tired of having notifications all the time, right? So is walking around and seeing pop-up messaging and doing video calls while walking, is that something I
Well,
totally want?
well, because you've got to think of the people who already have to wear glasses to see. Like they've already got it on their face. It would be nice if it did something more than let me see. Now I can see my phone as notifications come in.
Yeah,
I
and
think
now
that's
when
cool.
you're talking to someone, you gotta be
You'll be looking
wondering,
at the
are they
corner.
really paying
Yeah,
attention
yeah.
or they're just like reading the news?
Well, you already see
Um,
people always just looking at their wrists as people talking,
right.
because they got an Apple Watch
Yeah,
and
yeah.
stuff. It's like that's a thing now. It's society.
And then I know people want this other idea that, it's like Black Mirror or something. You're walking down the street and you're just looking at stuff and little labels are popping up. But
Yeah,
like, I also think about like, we had like Nokia Maps years ago. Remember, you'd hold up your phone and it would do that.
yeah. But that's the
How many of
difference. You
us,
have to hold up your
and
phone.
that was
That's
cool.
annoying.
Yeah, but it was cool. But even, yeah, it was cool. But like, even after the coolness, like no one ever really used it, right? Because it's
Yeah,
like, what's the point of this, right?
yeah.
Like I know it's always like, yeah, I'll tell you directions on like when you're walking in a city. Cool. I don't live in a city.
It's not
When
for
I
you,
use
Dan.
this when I just go to New York, and it's like, how hard is it to navigate right now when you have Google
It's
Maps anyway
for
in your
city
pocket?
people.
Yeah, yeah. So only city people will want this, right? But like,
Yeah.
yeah, well, I'm gonna wear it to the supermarket. I don't know. Like maybe there's a lot of potential here I'm missing, but I think that potential still many, many, many years down the road.
Yes.
But
Yes.
maybe I'm
Yeah.
wrong. I think AI is going to be the more interesting stuff for the coming years. So,
And
just
also,
real quick, I did do a quick editorial this week about Microsoft, and apparently they got their own ARM processor that's coming out in
uh,
2024. That's going to be built for Windows 12 and their Surface devices. And all this came from a report from Windows Latest because they saw two job postings dealing with SoC engineers being hired. I want to be very clear on this, and bookmark this. For all we know, Microsoft is working on a chip, right? They do have Microsoft Research has been known for years to be working on processor technologies and different architectures. That's been well established. It's well known. There's been papers filed. We already know Microsoft builds chips and co-processors when they need it, right? So the Surface device has famously a co-processor called the G series. They're out now on G6, and that helps reduce the latency with the pen and the pressure levels. And in fact, something like the Surface, the reason why Surface Hub and Surface Studio can do what it does is because they're able to put, I think, at least on Studio, it has 4 of these processors into quadrants. And it's what allows that to be such a giant, highly accurate display for inking. That was built by Microsoft. Pluton, its security chip, was built in conjunction, I believe, with Intel and AMD and everybody to be on the same page, but that was a Microsoft-led thing, right? So Microsoft absolutely does do this stuff. They also use it for Azure. So they build these chips when they need to. And so there's divisions within Microsoft. I listed the names of a couple of them, where that's what they do. They build silicon. They build them for Xbox too, right? Xbox is another one. HoloLens. A lot of the silicon in HoloLens is custom built by Microsoft. So they absolutely do that. Does hiring 2 people, one in Malaysia, mean that they're building a Surface processor? And this is how Windows Latest listed it. They were like, Microsoft's building a Surface processor to take on the MacBook's M1 with Windows 12. Like it was just like, and there was literally nothing in a job description that said any of that. Surface wasn't mentioned, Windows 12 wasn't mentioned. It was just them working on. And so I want to be clear here. Like Microsoft does do its own chips on occasion. They do work with Intel and Qualcomm and AMD with their own engineers to optimize those chips. So if we all remember the hype around Microsoft SQ1 and SQ2 and the AMD, the Microsoft processor, which were just their processors with their input in it. I think they went to Qualcomm and like, hey, could you do this and make it a little bit like this? And they did. And like Zach asked me this the other day, is like, hey, on this Lenovo ARM laptop, there's no power slider. And I was like, yeah, you're right, because only Microsoft devices, ARM devices, have a power slider. So if you're on the Surface Pro 9 ARM, you do get a power slider. So you could put it to high performance and you get a little extra performance out of it, or you could put the battery saver, or you could put it into the middle. Other ARM devices, they don't do that. They don't have any setting. It's just their default setting. So that's like kind of an example here. But Microsoft absolutely did not design these chips. So like, there is no evidence for this, and that's all I'm saying. There was a report from Bloomberg in 2020 saying that Microsoft was interested in possibly designing their own chips for Azure, which they then may use in Surface. And Bloomberg, don't get me wrong, very respectable. I believe them. They have very good sourcing. We just have not heard anything since then about any projects, and we haven't heard anything about that. And all I'm saying is, don't get your hopes up that that's what's going to happen when there's absolutely no evidence that's what they're doing, especially since we know Qualcomm is about to unveil Orion. They talked a little bit about it at Build. In fact, we just got a story up today talking a little bit about it, how it's not going to run ARM32 apps, just ARM64, which, that's not unusual. But we know Orion is supposed to be the competitors to Apple's M series processors. As I mentioned hundreds of times on this podcast, Orion is designed by the team that made Apple's processors. Now, they're not going to make a one-to-one. They can't do that because Apple owns that technology. But these people are the ones that know how those chips work. They know they design them. They're going to design them in such a way that it doesn't infringe on Apple's trademarks and patents and all that kind of stuff. But these, combined with Qualcomm's know-how, these are supposed to be those chips. I say supposed to because Gen 1, who knows? So they have that. They work very closely with Intel. They work very closely with AMD. When Windows 11 came out, the big thing with Windows 11 and both Intel 12th Gen was the P and E cores. And Windows 11 took advantage of that, meaning that when you put an app into the background, it knew to shift them to the E cores. And when you had an app that was in focus, those would use the P cores. That didn't happen by magic. That happened because there's a thing called Thread Director, and they built that with Microsoft so that when Windows 11 came out, this thing already supported it right out the gate. It works with Windows 10. But you don't get those benefits with Windows 10. You just get them with Windows 11. So Microsoft is already kind of getting a lot out of Intel, a lot out of AMD, a lot out of Qualcomm. I don't see why they need like a fourth chip. like what's the benefit there? That said, I wouldn't be surprised if they do work on this stuff in the background, because if something happened to Qualcomm, what happens if Qualcomm said, oh, we don't want to do ARM chips anymore? We're not going to do that for you guys. They could, right? They won't. Qualcomm, every time I talk, they're very happy to get Microsoft's business and work with them. But if something happened to Qualcomm, or something happened to ARM Limited, who designs those chips, they would need a fallback plan for this stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised that they're kind of tinkering around and designing stuff. But don't get your hopes up that, and I would just find it very weird that Microsoft on Gen 1 could come out with a processor that competes with Apple's M series. Like, are you kidding? I've said this before. Apple's chips, it took them 10 years to go from the A1 to the M1. Over a decade. It was actually a little bit longer than that. Over a decade to get there. And we knew that every time the new iPhone came out, oh, here's the A3, or well, actually started with the A4 is the actual when they started naming them. The A4, here's the A5 and the A6. And they started putting those into the different devices, and then they started scaling those up. And the way that Apple did it was each of these, the cores and stuff like that, didn't use a ton of power, so allowed them to slowly stack things up on top of it. And then they scaled up until they got to M1. But there's a reason why the M1 didn't come out in 2015. It would have been useful to have it in 2015, but they didn't do it back then, even though they were making their own ARM processors. Why? They needed to build up expertise and get the designs right. The idea that there is no A4 that Microsoft has right now. There's no ARM chip that's out there in the wild powering hardware that they can build off of. They would have to come out the gates with something like that. And there's no reason to believe that's possible. But like I said, we don't know what they're working on. All I'm saying is 2 job postings absolutely does not mean that. And they also mentioned, Windows 12 is going to be more ARM optimized. That's not secret.
This also doesn't make ARM optimized. I don't know what that means.
Well, like with Windows 11, they talked about how they use that new hybrid model for where you can mix Win32 and ARM apps together and stuff like that. And a lot of Windows 11's coding is now using that and is more ARM native than Windows 10 was. Yeah. And so the idea that when they go to Windows 12, they're going to continue down that road, I don't think is very surprising at all. I think that is absolutely guaranteed.
Well, what I meant by that is that, to my knowledge, out of box, Windows is now fully natively ARM. Like you're right, Windows 10, there were still processors that weren't. Windows 11, I think, is all natively ARM. I don't know what more they need to do at this point to continue that. Right. But yeah, going back to what you mentioned about that report from, I think it was Bloomberg, about how they were making chips for Azure, which may end up being in Surfaces. I can't remember how old that report is. Do you remember? Was it 2020? 2021?
Yeah, it was 2020.
Okay, so I believe I know what that was. That was before Intel and AMD stepped up, right? So that was a backup plan. It was, if Intel, AMD, and Qualcomm can't step up and compete here, then we will have to step in and try our best to do it ourselves. Similar to what Surface was. Back when Surface first came out, it was like, the PC industry sucks. We need to show them how to make a good computer, and that's what Surface did. The same would have been done there with the Microsoft's own chip, but Microsoft doesn't need to because Intel did step up. Qualcomm is stepping up. AMD did step up. We now have excellent chips from all 3 of those companies. Microsoft doesn't need to. It doesn't need to enter this market because it's another thing for them to poorly support.
Yeah, right? I mean, like, where's the evidence that 1, they could even pull this off, 2, they would support it, 3, the repercussions? You think Intel, AMD, Qualcomm will be like, oh, that's awesome, guys, congratulations. Yeah. No, of course not. They're going to be upset. And what about the OEM partners? You think HP now wants to, first of all, would Microsoft sell them the chip? Maybe, maybe not, right? And how would HP feel about buying now not only the OS, but going for the hardware from Microsoft? You're going to get into some issues there with monopolies and all that kind of stuff. But then if Microsoft just keeps it to themselves, is that necessarily fair either, right? Because then it's going to give their devices a leg up, competing against HP, Dell, Lenovo, and all those companies, even though they're technically not supposed to be making devices so much better that you will never buy an HP, right? So there's a lot of issues here, but I believe you're 100% right. They always want to have a backup plan, and they always want to be doing their own research, because if they can, they could pass that information then on to Qualcomm if they wanted to. It would be proprietary and all this kind of stuff, but they could work with these companies on that stuff.
We already have the partnership between Surface and Qualcomm, right? We have the SQ chips, and that's basically the best of both worlds. It's the Qualcomm doing the chips, as done Microsoft, air quotes, giving them a list of things they would like. Qualcomm building it, and then Microsoft gets to have it branded as a Microsoft chip. And that's really what the customer at the end of the day only cares about. Is it Microsoft's own chip? It's called the Microsoft SQ, so then yes. And it's the optics of the whole thing. Microsoft wins because they don't have to build their own chip or design it. They just hand off to Qualcomm. Qualcomm can deliver its expertise. Marketing comes back to being a Microsoft chip. The person in Best Buy doesn't know the difference. Everyone goes home happy. That's what and that's what happened at the end of that. And so, yeah, and that will continue. I think we'll see Microsoft SQ chips in more Surfaces. I fully believe we'll see an SQ series chip in a Surface laptop coming soon. A Surface Go, perhaps. I fully expect that to happen. And that's how Microsoft is doing chips. It's handing off to its partners because its partners do a better job here. And I don't see why Microsoft needs to try and compete there, especially since we know Microsoft and hardware aren't great.
And remember, and you mentioned the timing. So that was 2020 when that report came out. 2021, Qualcomm bought Nuvia, which is the ex-Apple engineers. And and they did that for a couple reasons. Obviously, they really wanted Microsoft's business, right? But it was $1.4 billion. It wasn't cheap. That definitely sent a signal to Microsoft, be like, hey, we're serious about making these PC chips. we just bought these guys who are going to be the best in the biz. What do you think those chips are going to be used? Orion's not going to be used in phones. They're going to be very high-end processors.
Yeah.
They bought that. I'm pretty sure Microsoft went, cool. We believe you guys are committed to this. You hired the right people, and we believe you that you're going to be able to kind of compete here against Apple. So again, like, why would they now need to go out and make their own chip? Like, have they really lost that much faith in Qualcomm, Intel, and AMD? And you're right. AMD is bragging with their new 7000 series chips, especially the latest one, saying that we beat Apple in performance across the board. Now, Apple still wins, I would say, in efficiency, but they're getting there. Intel, AMD, they're getting there. They're going to lower, they're getting more efficient. I said 14th gen is supposed to be more efficient. It's going to really start to focus on that. And Orion's going to be really fascinating to watch. I don't want to get people's hopes up too high, but apparently, according to Qualcomm, a lot of their partners have seen the chips, have tried them out, and they're getting a lot of commitments to making hardware. So I think we'll definitely hear more about Orion later this year. I think we'll get like benchmarks, details on the chips, all that later this year. And then I think they'll ship next summer, maybe. Whenever around Windows 12 when that comes out. So interesting stuff. Cool. Well, I think that does it. That was my rant. No Elon rant this week. Don't worry, people. Get spared. We'll save that for next week. Although there's actually, did you see how allowed? Sorry, he allowed. Now I started my own stuff. He allows people now to upload 2-hour videos. If you have Twitter Blue. I was like, people are going to upload movies.
Yeah, they already saw. I've seen Shrek 2 on Twitter already.
Was it John Wick 4 was up
last nice.
night. And it was very good quality.
Yeah.
People could just watch it. And because he doesn't have like the staff anymore, there's like no one enforcing takedown notices, so they just stay up. It's like I don't know. And apparently someone did the math on it, and they said if just 80 people, I think it was 70 or 80 people uploaded like 8 gigabyte files, like they would basically be losing money on Twitter Blue now because of the server costs and all that kind of stuff to be running. Because it's 8 gig. You're allowed to upload 8 gigabyte files up to 2 hours, and just the server costs on that.
Upload this podcast to Twitter.
I know. Seriously, it's fun. I hope people enjoy it. Maybe they don't. I don't know. But that's all I wanted to say because that was funny.
Yeah.
But anywho, that does it for the podcast. Hopefully you folks enjoyed it. We will do now Q&A with the audience. If you guys have questions, you can start firing them off there. We'll try to answer them. Other than that, we'll be back next Friday at our normal time at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time on our YouTube channel. You can join in the live broadcast there. Join in the chat. Have fun with us. Other than that, hit me up on Twitter, Daniel_Rubino, Rubino. Also on Mastodon, also on Blue Sky. All the information is there on Twitter, ironically. You can follow Zach at ZACBOWDEN. He too is on all those other platforms as well. And as always, thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time. Take care, everyone.
Wonderful. So yes, any questions? Now's the time to ask them. If there are no questions, we will go. That's how it works. Aren't drivers written around hardware? Windows needs to be at bare metal understanding with CPU hardware to write optimized Win. In return, MS share optimizations with chip makers.
So this has to do, this advantage will always be with Apple because they do the OS, right. They make their chips, and they make the hardware. And they keep making more and more components, right? They're even now trying to make their own 5G modems. They're still relying, I believe, on Intel for those. When you control the full stack like that, you can do that. You can get bare metal, drivers and all that, and get basically maximized performance. They maximize the memory systems with the M1s because of their hardware. The disadvantage to that is you're always going to just have whatever Apple is selling as devices. So you get a couple laptop options. None have touchscreens. None are 2-in-1s. None have dual screens. None are foldables. Or you get a tablet like the iPad Pro, or you get their phone. So you get what they offer. Because of that, even though Apple's market share is slowly ticked up over the years, it's still the same 8 to 14%, depending on what numbers you're looking at. That's because there's always going to be variety with the PC space. And so that's the benefit of PC. You can get, different types of computers. You get desktop setups. You can get mini desktops, 2-in-1s, foldables, dual screen, all that kind of stuff. So that's the difference there. Microsoft also has to build Windows so it works with AMD, works with Intel, works with Qualcomm. You got to make everybody happy. They are doing optimizations around all those chips. Their closeness to chip makers is closer than it's ever been. So that stuff is becoming more and more efficient. But I think, Apple will technically always have that little bit of advantage. That doesn't mean, no, that Windows can't kind of compete there. I think they will. It's just technology. It's just processors. There's more than, a few ways to make a chip. And we'll see what happens with Orion, right? I don't know. It's going to be really interesting. I don't want to get too high hopes up on Orion. I think it's going to be good. But, I don't think they'll be cheap. I think they're going to be more expensive than the current ARM devices. I think it's going to be expensive. There's a lot of questions around heat and battery life and how much wattage it's using and performance. It's a tall order, right? I think there's also speculation, I don't think they're trying to target M1. We don't know what they're trying to target, right? But presumably they're trying to target at least the M2 or M2 Pros so that when he's come out, they're not completely a generation behind. But we don't know, right? So there's going to be a lot of, but I would also argue that the M1 and M2, the difference between those, if you have an M1, you're pretty happy. I think the only people who would get the M2 or the M2 Pros are that real 0.01% of people who just really, really need every megahertz and efficiency thing out there that they can. But most consumers, I think if you have an M1, you're going to be okay, I'm going to keep this for a couple of years now. You can be totally happy with it. So I'm not sure they need to, beat Apple at the M3 necessarily, but we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah. Someone was asking, does Windows Copilot need any additional hardware requirements? No. We mentioned it on the podcast. Windows Copilot does not require an NPU. That is, we'll likely see features that require an NPU as part of Windows V Next. But for Windows 11, no. Windows Copilot doesn't need it. You can run it on any Windows 11 PC.
You're starting to see some of that stuff with the camera features, the built-in background blurring, noise reduction, AI tracking. I think if you have an NPU, and that's built into Windows now, you could start using that already. So you'll see more stuff around that. You're right. But then, of course, there's the local stuff, which, the possibilities are endless. Yeah,
Windows 12 will focus massively on local AI stuff that an NPU would be required for. But for Windows 11, no. Windows Copilot will be on any Windows 11 PC, to my knowledge.
When can we expect Xbox Copilot? Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if they'll call it that, right? I think, though, you'll definitely see AI has a huge potential for gaming. The first one I can think of is simply already what you kind of get with recommendation systems. I like going on Steam and, here's this game and you'd like it because you play these other games kind of thing. AI can get very smart in terms of you're going to probably like this game. Since you played 200 hours of this one, you're probably going to like this game, right? AI could definitely help there. And that's really, really useful because right now I think people have a big problem with, especially developers have this problem, right? AAA games get all the attention. And then we have to write this story here's this little tiny indie game you never heard of that's really amazing, you should play. That's always the way the headlines are written, right? Because that's the way indie games are. They're just these small little teams. Sometimes they create amazing little titles, and it relies on word of mouth to get out there. But if you can have AI kind of suggesting these things to you in the first place, that does a lot of good for developers, and it does a lot of good for gamers who are yeah, you're right. I actually did like that game. So I think the potential is there for that. Of course, there's potential in the games themselves, but that's a separate thing, right? Developers can use games. They already talked about, NPC, non-playable characters will be able to get smarter with dialogue and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, I think they're going to probably be working on that in the next few months. So we'll try to dig around on it.
Surface Laptop Go 3 is supposed to be released this year. Are there any changes and or improvements? I did hear that there might be a sort of design update. Not too sure on the specifics of that, but other than that, I have no idea currently. What email app do you suggest on the Pixel Fold other than Gmail? Well, we've not been able to try the Pixel Fold yet, but I don't see why Outlook wouldn't be amazing on it.
It should be optimized for dual screen. It should be able to. Yeah, I would say Outlook. What do you think Microsoft should do to push third-party devs to optimize their apps to run on Windows on ARM? Well, they already are. If you paid attention to Bill, there
Yeah.
were quite a lot of announcements around like Unity support. So this comes down to how do you get them to do it? Well, you don't pay them, but you make the tools available to them, and you reduce the friction of them converting their apps to it. And so that's what's been happening. I've talked about this for ages, where if you want to write basic apps for ARM, like you could have always done that. And the thing is, complicated apps like Photoshop have like various libraries and components to them, some of which aren't optimized for ARM. So and that's where you can do these kind of hybrid apps. That was a way to get around that. It's like, well, you don't need to make the entire app ARM, which may be good because we don't have the tools to do that. But you can make your app partially optimized for ARM, and that'll help in performance. So that was one step there. The other step, though, while they're doing that, is you build out all these separate engines and libraries and make them ARM compatible, and so that it's easier to code. And that's at Build, there was a lot of focus on this. There was a lot of new tools made available. We didn't really cover it as much in depth because we're just not developers here, but you can go watch those sessions. That's how you do it. It's also going to come down to simply market share, right? Basically, what devices are out there? Are people buying into ARM? The more Microsoft sells Surface Pro 9, the more Lenovo sells X13Ss and all this kind of stuff, the market will slowly drive itself. I think it's still got a while to get there. That said, Qualcomm did say 2024 is going to be a, quote, inflection point for Windows on ARM. They see that as going to be the year that things kind of really break through. That's going to be a combination, I think, of Orion. I think it's a combination of Windows 12. I think it's a combination of AI and NPUs, which Qualcomm actually has a leg up on compared to Intel. And AMD is still pretty far behind on all that stuff. So that's what they're predicting, that 2024, and I would say late 2024, will be the time where like this stuff gets serious. And that like this will be the actual, now will that happen? I don't know. But that's what they're expecting. When that happens, then devs will start to even do more work, right? So I think that's the plan right there.
Yeah. Someone was asking any questions or any hints about a Surface Laptop Studio 2 release dates. To my knowledge, October. We'll probably see new Surfaces late September, early October timeframe.
Yeah, that's usually the time.
Will we see? So will we see a bunch of new hardware refreshes with Windows 12? I mean, like redesigns, processors, etc. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure some companies will take it as an opportunity to redesign. Surface will almost certainly have a new form factor, maybe, to launch alongside Windows. Usually, with every new version of Windows, there's a new form factor. So Windows 8 was obviously the original Surface. Windows 10 was the Surface Book. Windows 11 was the Surface Laptop Studio, and Windows 10X would have been the Surface Neo. What features do you expect to see in the new Moment 4 for Windows 11 now that a new insider build and the first for Moment 4 has come to the base channel not too long ago? I'm pretty sure Moment 4 is just 23H2, in which case we talked all about that on the podcast, so just rewind it. Any info on Surface Duo 3 beside that it's foldable now? And what are your main phones right now since the Surface Duo is somewhat dead? No new info on the Duo 3. I keep saying this, we probably won't know more about it until next year at this point. If it's not coming to the end of next year at the earliest, then I'm not going to hear about it again until it's at a point where it's almost done. So, yeah. What we're using right now, I'm currently sort of not using anything. I'm using a Pixel 4, only because I had it lying around. I'm waiting for the Pixel Fold, though. That will be my next. That will be the phone I'm using next.
And I'm on Pixel 7. Sometimes I use the S23 Ultra.
Let me look through for some more questions. I don't see any. All right, last call for questions. If you have any questions, now's the time to put them in the chat. If you put a question in the chat earlier and we missed it, put it in again. and maybe we'll answer it on the second go. We didn't do thing of the week this week. I had a thing of the week as well. We'll do it next week. I'll save.
Oh, sorry.
Until next week. That's all right.
Yeah, I recommend it. You should really watch that Dungeons and Dragons movie though.
Is it good? I don't like Dungeons and Dragons the game.
I did a whole thing on it.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying, like.
Yes, it's really really good. It's so funny. The dialogue is great.
Okay.
Like it shouldn't be that good. Like, but we were watching it. Like this movie is really. And part of it's just the casting is great, but some of it is just the dialogue. It's just so funny, and it was just a cool story. I'm telling you, go rent it, go watch it. You're gonna be like, damn, that was actually a lot of fun.
What will happen to the Windows shell after the rejuvenated File Explorer rolls out to the public? Nothing. The Windows shell will still be the Windows shell. It's not going away. Did you daily drive Windows Phone before Pixel when that was still supported? Yeah, I daily drove Windows Phone until the bitter end. I daily drove Windows Phone. So go on.
No, I was gonna say I had a Pixel 3 and I was using Windows Phone, switching between them at the time.
I daily drove Windows Phone until Joe Belfiore tweeted that Windows 10 Mobile was no longer a focus.
Yep.
That was the day my happiness flew away, and I've never been the same since. I think my first.
I was gonna say one. The person comments, I can't pronounce his name, says D&D movie is amazing. See.
Yeah. I think my first non-Windows phone after that was the Nokia 8. Do you remember, because Nokia was doing Android phones?
Oh yeah.
I really liked that phone. That was a nice phone.
Yeah, we saw them at what event was that? Was that a World Congress or something like that?
Something like that, yeah. Is Moment 3 stable or causing issues for people contemplating installing it? Well, it's only been out for a day, so I don't really know. But in testing, I don't think anyone's really complained about it. It's a cumulative update. It's a monthly roll-up. It's not... I think you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Any news on Yahoo Mail for the Windows Outlook app? No, sadly not. No info on that. Probably later this year, I think that will be rolling out. Okay.
What was that about the Windows, the email app?
Yeah, well, so the new Outlook only supports Outlook and Gmail currently. It doesn't support Yahoo.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's coming.
All right.
Yeah.
Do you have big expectations for a potential Surface Pro 11-inch? I mean, not really. It's going to be a Surface Pro, but smaller. There's really not much to say. I think maybe if Microsoft is smart, they would make it so the 11-inch Surface Pro and the Surface Go 4 share the same keyboard. Because, like, why wouldn't they? If they're the same, sort of roughly the same size, then they could just have one keyboard that applies to both. I think that would be nice. Other than that, no, I really have no idea what to really expect regarding the next Surface Pro. I have heard that we might not be getting one this year. Originally, they were sort of hoping for end of 2023, of course, an annual Surface Pro. But to my knowledge, that's been pushed back because of reasons, layoffs, recession, etc., etc. They kind of want to sell through existing stock first. And so the Surfaces that will be renewed next will be the ones that have the lowest stock in the Microsoft Store and across retail spaces. All right. With that, we will be heading off. Thank you very much for tuning in. We'll be back next Friday. Follow us on Twitter. We'll keep you updated when we go live. Until then, we will see you next time. Bye-bye.